Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to today's community call for Tuesday, October 8th. Today the subject is how our retreat centers serve. Oh, that was last time's call. This time we're talking about climate resilience in the hold on. Resilience within climate chaos. This is the second in a two-part series. Stan and Oren joined us last June, I believe, to start this conversation, but it's been an ongoing conversation for RCC almost since its inception, and is becoming more and more relevant as we know as the days go on. My name is Erin McCauley. I'm the RCC admin assist. I welcome any pronouns in reference to me and also invite you to share your pronouns if you would like to share them. I also invite you to update your names to include your retreat centers so that we can get to know each other a little bit better if you would like to do that. Before we get started, I like to share the RCC core values and community agreements just so you get a sense of how we like to hold space together. And I'll do that now and run through those real quick. So the founding core values of RCC, these are the values that we gather around and that we hold to be some of our defining characteristics of the community that we hold in place. The very first core value that we hold in our hearts is the power of place and space. So this is the idea that retreat centers are spaces that are connected to the land, deeply connected to the land and connected to our communities, but in a way that is set aside from the normal flow of day-to-day life. So they create spaces where we have the opportunity to pause, to reflect, to, as core value number 2 says, do both inner and outer work. The idea is that the inner work that we do on ourselves to help open up change and transformation is also work that is important to the world outside. And the work that we do outside to bring change and connection to communities also affects our inner world and brings this reciprocal connection of change within ourselves and in our communities. And the transformation that we're hoping comes out of RCC is number 3, our third core value is a commitment to universal flourishing. So that's the flourishing of not just human life, but more than human life, to land, animals, spirit. We are committed to creating a world that's hopefully good and supportive for everybody. When we hold space together, these are our community agreements. We ask that you speak from your own experience, tell your own stories. Your voice and your story are important. We're all knowers and learners in this space, so we bring different fields of expertise to the table. It's a kind of a stone soup sort of arrangement. Silence can be centering, and movement and sound can be too. So we might take a moment to pause and to just be quiet together, or we might do an activity or sing together or something like that. So you can expect different ways for us to come into the space together. We do ask that you keep other stories confidential, but to share what you learn. Excuse me. So what that means is that take the learning, but remove any of the identifying details. So if someone shares a very personal story, let them have agency over sharing their story the way that they would like to share it. And take their name away if you want to share your learning from their story with someone else. This is an invitational space, so please participate as you are able. That means we understand retreat centers are very busy places, so if you need to step away or if you need to come late or leave early, we do understand, and are just glad that you are here whenever you can be here to be with us. We also ask that you hold discomfort with grace and deep listening. So some of the topics that we touch upon can be very difficult to talk about. They may bring up feelings inside ourselves that don't really feel great, but we ask that you kind of sit with that discomfort, really listen to what it's telling you, and yeah, to engage with just the spirit of we're here to learn and grow together. We're not here to fix each other. And our very last, one of our favorite quotes, this choice is the smallest unit of liberation by Dr. Leticia Nieto. So we'd like to offer as many choices as we can for your participation. And if you have ideas for how we can offer more choices, please do let us know. And we'll be happy to consider what you say. So, and with that, I'll turn it over to our facilitators today. We've got Stan and Oren with us. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, thank you so much, Erin. And thank you all for joining us. You know, these are truly tender times. And before maybe I introduce myself and what we hope to cover here today, I would love to just take a moment of silence for us to land here and maybe to just hold all of those that are in the suffering in the world just for a moment in our hearts. Peace. Thank you. So briefly, my name is Stanley, and I am the director of the Resilience Project at Commonweal. And I am focused on helping Commonweal develop a resilient site and helping our bioregion develop its resilience and organizations beyond. And in addition to that work, I work on what we call the global polycrisis, which is the intersection of various stressors. So it's not just climate, but there are financial, technological, justice, democracy challenges that all intersect together and increasingly make future shocks that are more severe and more frequent, sadly. So we have several global projects at Commonweal that focus on that. And part of my role is to take that analysis and apply it to our sites and to other sites and to consider resilience from that lens, not just climate. And I'll let Oren introduce himself shortly and give a little bit of context for what we're doing. But just quickly here, there are two really big pieces here that we would love to discuss. One, we're going to do a scenario work around what a major catastrophe, how we would think about it and how we would respond. And I can lay out more details about that. But scenario work is something that is utilized across different sectors, across different size organizations, and ironically was actually pioneered by Shell, Dutch Royal, to figure out how they would respond to dynamic stressors to their own infrastructure. And it proved to be a very powerful tool. And it's powerful for a couple of reasons. One, it helps us to imagine scenarios that sadly are actually a little bit too imaginable today with the catastrophes that are in the news and everything, but it allows us to think personally about how we would respond, how our retreat centers would respond, what resources are available, and how to kind of navigate uncertainty. The truth is that these things are dynamic, they change quickly, you know, they happen fast, and it's not always clear what's happening and where they're going. So scenario work can help us kind of foster a little mental agility and increase our adaptive capacity. So the second part of our conversation is going to be about scenario work. And then the first part is I just want to open some space for any of you, for any retreat centers who have been affected by this recent hurricane, who may be affected by this coming hurricane, who have anything to share. How have you navigated? How have you responded? Are there any challenges? Are there any lessons that you've learned? You know, And so I invite anybody who is in that situation to share. And the goal here is that the retreat centers, in my view, play a really critical role in the world, particularly this country. And retreat centers, I believe, are on the front lines of resilience. I believe retreat centers can become resilience hubs. I believe retreat centers are situated in your communities to help disadvantaged, vulnerable folks. You're embedded in your local community, your neighbors, your friends, your local nonprofits, all are probably familiar with your work, probably also needs to expand. But there's a unique role, and plus, retreat centers are land-based organizations. So you have the ability to do things that other nonprofits are not able to. And so anyway, I'll leave that there. But I want to turn this over to Oren before we dive into this conversation and maybe share a little bit more about kind of the context, the moment, and anything else that comes to mind. Actually, oh, sorry. Before Oren does that, I would love to get a sense of who is here on this call. So perhaps we could go around and people could introduce themselves quickly. Maybe a few words about your retreat center, where you're located. Maybe we could start off with Brenda, if you're okay with that. Maybe you make an introduction, pass it along to the next person, and then we'll have Oren. Forgive me, Oren. I hope that wasn't terribly rude.
Thank you, Stanley. So good to see you. My name is Brenda Salgado. I'm calling in from unceded Ohlone lands in San Leandro, California, in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I'm the director of the Racial Healing Initiative. So I'm very grateful to be part of RCC and in relationship with many of you. And this, as an Indigenous person, this topic is very dear to my heart right now, especially as I know that many of our retreat center friends are going through challenges. I'm really glad to see Southern Dharma here, so I'm going to pass it to Vanessa.
Thank you so much, Brenda. I'm Vanessa. I'm a retreat manager at Southern Dharma. And during this kind of time of crisis with Hurricane Helene, I've stepped in to kind of handle a lot of communications work as we've now expanded into like a lot of disaster aid relief and yeah, really are in this exact scenario. So I was really thrilled to see this kind of come up, and I'm excited to speak with you all and connect more. And let's see, Kristen.
Thank you, Vanessa. I'm Kirsten Vandergiesen-Reitsma, and I'm on the land of the Potawatomi, and before that, Peoria Nation, with Gilchrist Retreat Center, which is part of the Fetzer Institute in Kalamazoo, Michigan. We're about halfway between Chicago and Detroit. Our staff just did an after-action review of COVID, which was really interesting. So I'm thinking about the question of what are we preparing for, and what is our identity in resilience, and then how do we plan for that versus just sort of a scattershot approach of things we hear about or think about. How do we get strategic? So glad to be in this conversation with all of you and think about ourselves as part of a network. And I will pass to Nancy.
Thanks, Kirsten. I'm Nancy Lee. I am in Mi'kma'ki, unceded, unsurrendered Mi'kmaq homeland. I see a friend here from Tatamagouche, Karen. I'm a friend of Tatamagouche Center now, and I'm on the RCC Stewardship Circle. Tata got hit with a pretty hard hurricane in 2022. It's a little bit of a blur, but I think what I'm most interested in this conversation is ways that we show collective care, ways that we come together, and even outside of the big disasters, just even when tragedy hits family, that's a big part of what Tata does in our community. So I will pass, maybe I'll pass to Karen.
Thanks, Nancy. Yeah, so I have recently stepped into chair for the Tatamagouche Center, and Yeah, this is not a conversation that we are yet having at the board level, but it's very close to my heart. And I've been doing a lot of thinking and reading about preparedness, and see that retreat centers have a important role to play, So that's my interest today in being here. And I'll pass it to Oren.
Well, I guess I'll go now and later. I am at Commonweal, which is on and where the Gualin village used to be on Coast Miwok land. And our exposure to this was fires. That is our California threat. And 7 years ago, when the big fires were in Marin and Sonoma County, we learned a lesson in readiness, resilience, and the ongoingness of it, not only during the crisis, but then in the years to come. I'm glad to be part of this conversation. And I will pass it on to Nicola.
Thanks, Oren. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicola. I use she and they pronouns. I'm here on Lenape land at Kirk Ridge Retreat Center, which is on the Kittatinny Ridge in northern Appalachia. And so grateful for this conversation. I think one of the questions I'm holding is, in the midst of everything that we're doing with programming and rentals and all of that, how do we prepare to pivot when something suddenly happens, like a hurricane or a big storm? So grateful for your presence here. I will pass to my friend Tevin.
Oh, I'm unmuted already. Hi, good to see y'all. My name is Tevin East. I'm the director of the Dreaming Stone Arts and Ecology Center, and we are in the traditional land of the Cherokee and Catawba in the foothills of the Blue Ridge, right on the Broad River, which is downstream from Lake Lure and Chimney Rock. We actually had a community safety training scheduled for the weekend that the hurricane hit, with some friends from the Highlander Center. I had some natural disaster was not as high on my list as thinking about being prepared to build circles of care in the aftermath of an election where I anticipate a lot of upheaval in my community. And so, yeah, so it's interesting to have that training scheduled and cancel it. We will reschedule it. We'll probably make it 2 days instead of 1, and we'll probably have much better turnout now for it. So I'm ready to rethink what's needed in that program. And I'll pass it to Liz.
Excuse me, I'm Liz Coifer. I am lucky enough to say that I'm safe and sound in Cincinnati. We're at Transfiguration Spirituality Center, our retreat center. But we do have a sister fellow ministry from the large organization in Bat Cave, North Carolina. Thankfully, all our people are safe and our buildings are mostly safe. But they just, like today, got Starlink to get, continuous internet access and things like that. So big concern there. But as Stanley, your questions, we're still figuring out what our response is and how are we going to manage things. And we're looking at probably a year or more before we're ready to start rolling with things down there. If we go back, we might reconsider how we use the space. But so that's going on. And while we don't have any property or people specifically in Florida, our sisters have a large group of oblates for the community who live down there, mostly elderly women who are, in the path of Milton. And personally, I was supposed to go to Bat Cave this weekend and Sarasota next weekend. So, my minor whine compared to everybody else's loss is But people are filling it all over, so. That's that, and I'm way behind on work, so if my head's down, I'm listening, I just might not participate in this conversation as actively as I usually do, so. Who has not gone yet? Dan, I'm gonna toss it to you.
Hello, from other side of the world. I'm from Croatia. I have a little bit of a geographical test about America to know where you are. Croatia, it's across Italy on Adriatic Sea. I am 62 and I'm in phase of wrapping up my 40-something years of holistic doing, and my dream was to have a center, holistic or retreat. So I'm wondering and looking and seeing what you are doing, and just to get inspired. Thank you.
Leslie, I don't believe you've gone yet. Welcome, Dan.
Hi, everybody. Leslie Hoffman, she, her. I'm located currently on the unceded land of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh in North Vancouver, British Columbia. I'm serving as the Interim Director of Development for Hollyhock, which is located on the Klahoose and Holcomb Nations land on Cortes Island off the coast of British Columbia. I love this conversation. I've worked many years. I worked with Hollyhock years ago as program director, so I'm deeply embedded in their community, and I'm really feeling fortunate to be working in a capacity to raise money at a time like this, where, as Oren and Stanley both stated, or the Stanley said, the need has never been greater. Our centers are a service to our community, and these are important questions. So I am very, very happy to be here to listen. Deborah.
Deborah, are you there? If not, perhaps Francisco, are you there?
Yes, I am here, and I am glad to be part of this call today. Francisco Burgos, joining you from Pendle Hill in Wallingford, Pennsylvania, the heritage land of the Lenni Lenape people. And I think that this conversation that you and Oren will be leading today is a most needed one, considering what many of our colleagues are facing in a more direct way today. So thank you.
Thank you. Have we got everybody?
Even Aaron, I think, still, yes.
Yeah, I could do a little intro again, just to let you all know. I'm Erin McCauley. I'm the RCC admin assistant. I'm located in Michigan, and yeah, just I have friends, family, colleagues, like all of you, in areas that have been directly affected by Hurricane Helene and are in the path of threat for Hurricane Milton. And I especially have on my mind Brian Lemoy and the folks at the Franciscan Tampa Bay Center. And yeah, it's a lot to hold, both to be in the middle of it and to be someone on the outside of it, wishing we could do more. And I'm very interested to find out what RCC could do as a community to be a support if we're not in the thick of it, how we can come together and collective care, as Nancy said. I believe it was Nancy. And look out for each other and help each other when things like this happen. So.
Wonderful. Oren,
Eve. Yes, thank you. I'm Eve. I'm with Elohi Center. on land of Cherokee and Muskogee. And we're in northern Georgia, so the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains too. And we were fortunately spared by the devastation that came through, both with our southern neighbors and our northern neighbors. So we feel very grateful for that. And I see that, yeah, it's close to home. And I think a lot about, over the years, I've seen the West Coast, you guys in Commonweal and Esalen and Brighton Bush with fires and floods and landslides and things like that. And now seeing it hitting so close to home too is just, I as well am grateful for this connection with you guys, and also feel very touched, Aaron, that Aaron reached out to me with an email saying, "How are you guys?" And it just felt like this is another example of, the sweet connections that I've made here with you guys, and grateful for you all. So looking forward to hearing about the conversation. Thank you.
And I think that's a perfect lead into opening this session. I've been with RCC since the beginning, and I'm on the stewardship circle with Nancy and Francisco and Kirsten and Brenda and Aaron. And RCC is going through its own process right now of developing our leadership in the organization for the next generation. And this idea of resilience is very deep in our mind, and it has affected us directly. Some of us were supposed to be at the Big Bear Retreat Center 2 weeks ago, but because of the line fire in the San Bernardino Mountains, the retreat got canceled. The retreat center is okay, but this is the reality that we're living in, and retreat centers are kind of situated both because of the rural settings that we're often in and the connection to urban areas that are often not too far, and a lot of our constituents come from. In our case, it's San Francisco. For the Big Bear Retreat Center, it's Los Angeles. We each have our own. And we've been talking about this for a while, but it really emerged at the RCC national gathering that we did at Five Oaks in Canada, where we held a session. And I'd say half the retreat participants showed up because this is so urgent on so many of our minds. And that really brought it to the top of the agenda for RCC to really ask the question of what can we do both to support each other as people that are holding these land-based organizations, and also what can we learn from each other and how we can support the community around us. So RCC has been focusing on this. This is the second of a series that will be talking about resilience and what it means. And in the shadow of the hurricanes, it feels all the more palpable. So I'm grateful that we have the chance to do it. As Vanessa was saying, this is even within the larger context. We've discussed in the PAC the idea, like, what is this election going to lead to, regardless of the outcome or anybody's own political belief? We're not a political organization. There might be a need for centers of refuge. Who knows? So keeping these conversations alive and making sure that we're as ready as possible. And I'm grateful that we have Stanley, who's here, Stanley is both a firefighter and a doctor of Chinese medicine. So he sits in that sweet spot that retreat centers do as well. There's a strong pragmatic side, but also understanding the flow of energy and how we move in the world. So I'm grateful to hand it over to Stanley so he can lead us in the session today.
Thank you, Oren. If I were to just take your comments just a step further, I think that there's a really strong argument to be made that retreat centers are an increasingly critical resource of refuge for people around the world. I mean, and forgive me for going on here, but resilience is not just emergency response. This conversation, I feel like, is the entry into this resilience conversation. The basics are, how do we keep ourselves operating? How do we keep our staff? How do we keep our communities safe when disaster strikes? And that's what emergency response is about. And that is just the beginning. resilience is also about the world that we want to move into. What's beauty mean? What's just mean? What does equity mean? What does community mean? And I feel like those things collectively contribute to our resilience. And there's a tremendous amount of work to be done in each of those domains. So I just wanted to be clear that emergency response is just the entry point to resilience here. And retreat centers have a critical point to play there, especially as those other stressors that come our way are loneliness, technological isolations, declining democracies, spiritual injury. Retreat centers have a role to play in all of those dimensions. And I think that all of you are doing extraordinary work in those domains, and I very much want to learn more about it. But I do believe that retreat centers offer critical refuge in these really turbulent times. So with that said, I'm wondering if anybody on this call, I believe a few people here mentioned that you either were in the path of devastation, close to it, know people. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to share any insights, any lessons, or anything that surprised you from those experiences before moving to the scenario work. Or even any reflections that may be of value to this group. I suspect that the experience of one retreat center was actually quite applicable to the experience of all retreat centers. Eva?
I am eager to hear how you're doing, Vanessa, because I know that the destruction that y'all are dealing with is a great deal more than what we're dealing with. We did not have serious damage. We had so many trees down, even trees over a dwelling, but it did not damage the dwelling. And we had shocking floods, but the dam that was said to be breaking held. And so we did not have serious damage. We dealt with no power and water for 10 days. And that has me thinking about a lot of stuff. We have a lot of conversations that have happened. We've had a goal to do, to figure out our energy backup this year, and haven't gotten around to it, and are now recommitting and thinking about that project anew. And I am also thinking about it in relationship to being available as a place for folks to get showers or internet, or to be a resource to a community when power's down. I have so many questions. I have so many thoughts about how to be more ready next time. Our small town is I'm very aware of like mutual aid organizations in different parts of Western North Carolina, and it's been beautiful to see them rise to the occasion. Lake Lure and Chimney Rock, which are in our county, are mostly like second homes and rentals, and I just am seeing the lack of community organization there, and pained to recognize that lack. Our small town is changing, and so I do see where there is who's showing up with ready to resource folks, and that's really exciting. And I want to keep nurturing those connections and think about our readiness on the center in the future, and resourcing the larger community with like emergency plans. Yeah, I could say so much more, but I'm feeling lots of befuddlement and lots of need to process and be ready in a different way next time. Vanessa, how are you doing?
Yeah, Thank you. No, I loved hearing your experience down there. Because yeah, also a lot of befuddlement, a lot of like, oh, what are we gonna do different next time? You know, if it's kind of hard for all of us to even think about next time at this moment because we're still in this time. But I think that there will be, you know, yeah, kind of hopefully a significant after action review of how all our efforts have gone once things kind of stabilize a little bit more in the region. So um, Southern Dharma, our retreat center, the actual facility, is located in Hot Springs or in the Spring Creek region. And Hot Springs, the town, was very much affected by the flooding. They're still shoveling out mud that is apparently toxic. You know, there's lots of huge infrastructural damage that will need a lot of time to repair. But the center itself, it was fine. We had downed trees. Our road is very long and gravelly and got washed out a little bit, but all things considered, you know, our facility was okay. And we have a generator that powers our main building. And so, you know, our actual space was resilient in that sense. Like we are just isolated enough, and we've had like ice storms and things where, you know, we have to kind of be self-sustaining to a certain degree just because we're so remote. So on our kind of infrastructural level, like we're doing fine. And now we're looking at calling in volunteers because we've had it's just an outpouring of support across the country from our different, you know, our vast like Sangha members, people who haven't come in, you know, even a decade to the center, you know, would love to come now and help out the region. And so we're kind of stepping out of emergency response mode, it feels like, and more into a more organized kind of phase. We've canceled our next 2 retreats. There's not meant to be any travel in the region that is not like local travel or emergency travel. So we'll see about our retreat at the end of the month. But basically for the next month at least, our focus as a retreat center is really just all our aid work. So while the retreat center has been fine, the staff living at the retreat center have been engaged in the Spring Creek community. And they will now be, you know, as volunteers come in and stay at the center, they will be kind of facilitating, you know, organizing where volunteers are going and how to support. We, on the Asheville side of things, have started, you know, have had a, you know, it's been, gosh, a week and a half, maybe maybe the time is blurring, but we created like another small kind of mutual aid resupply that's scaling up now. I feel like there are a lot of small places that are now trying to collaborate much more intentionally with other resupply and mutual aid organizations. And just huge, the biggest shout out to Sonia, our executive director, because, you know, her connections, her spearheading, her direction, and also, you know, her you know, vast connections in the area have really like made it possible for our efforts to be effective in a very significant way. And so we're now moving into a larger space. We're kind of scaling up our aid operations, and you know, this is a big enough event that it's, you know, we feel called to do this kind of Dharma work and this intervention work. You know, because we're normally, you know, our center is so isolated, we're not really a community hub otherwise. And so it's really us like actively, you know, going out in this moment and assisting in every way we can, which is fantastic. And so we've fundraised a lot of money. We're still fundraising, and we're just trying to get needs met. And yeah, and you know, then once we kind of scale back to our normal mission of offering retreats, then we'll be able to kind of, you know, be able to find trusted partners that are continuing this work beyond, you know, the month of October. So there's so many insights, there's so many questions, and there's so many, you know, reflections that I'm sure we'll be able to distill on the other end. but for now, you know, we're just really taking things day by day, and needs are shifting here day by day. So it's a lot of flexibility, it's a lot of community organization, and a lot of just eagerness and willingness, and so many people are willing to help right now. So it's just, it is tragic to see, and also strikingly beautiful to witness all that. So thank you.
Vanessa, can I ask you a question about what you felt like you had, or what made you feel like your retreat center was resilient? You mentioned being rural, that you had some stuff in place, and I would love to hear a little bit more about that. And it sounds like having a community willing to come in to help, having strong leadership and a really clear direction, a lot, and plus this resilient infrastructure helped you be in a position to engage with mutual aid, to offer to support your community and extend that Dharma work more broadly. And I feel like this could be, we could talk for a very long time about your circumstance. And I think we would all have a lot to learn. But I'm very curious what you think you had already done before this storm that helped you be resilient, whether that was the infrastructure, whether it was social, whether it was community. But I'm just want to ask you on that point.
Of course, yeah. Well, on the infrastructure side of things, our center, you know, our actual, you know, our power, we have a very substantive generator that has helped us a number of times, because we lose power, I don't want to say consistently, but at least at some point in the year, because a tree falls or a, you know, ice storm hits or something like that. So that we have and we use, and is reliable. And then our water comes from wells, and as long as we've got power from the generator, our wells work. So kind of on the baseline needs, that's met. Food, you know, it's not as if there was talk at one point of trying to have like a garden, but that's just not in our scope. So like, we're not actually food resilient. We do have, you know, our large pantry to serve for our retreats, and so we generally have back stock. But you know, if we were going to be, you know, if we had a full load of retreatants and then a crisis like this hit and they were not able to depart and nobody was able to leave the center, food would definitely be like a limiting factor. But we have a lot of like tools also, and I'm sure this is true for many people, but like we just have a robust like facilities, like a wonderful facilities head and lots of equipment, so like chainsaws and things, because this is very extreme, Hurricane Helene, but you know, we've had to make sure that we are like we could get out of our center. You know, we have a tractor, we have different tools, like yeah, just a lot of chainsaws and things like that, so that we can on a basic level be okay at our facility. But when it comes to actual, like, you know, like you said, resilience is much more than just emergency response. And I think on that side of things, like, yeah, it's right now really strong leadership and utilizing our community, and like understanding that this is, you know, it's all just mutual engagement. Like we are calling upon, we know that, you know, many of the people that come on retreat with us are mental health workers. And so we're calling in, you know, we sent out a call to all mental health and spiritual teachers to see, like, would you be willing to offer temporary free counseling? We've not actually set that up yet. I don't think we're working on that. But it is an opportunity for us to directly say, you know, I've just been sending so many texts saying like, thank you, because people are saying, I want to help. And I get to say like, thank you, we will be in touch. And recognizing like people want to assist and they feel good to assist, and we want to accept their assistance and thank them. And like that, you know, that's on one scale. And then another scale is like, you know, we're connected with other centers in the community, and like we're just really like we're working with Urban Dharma, which is a separate facility in West Asheville, and that's been our storefront because we have this close relationship with Urban Dharma, you know, so we're able to collaborate, and it's those collaborations that like have made our efforts so successful. And I think, yeah, so when it comes to resilience, like leadership, and then just having this community, and in non-emergency times, it's really like what we're all trying to do is foster that community. And then this is a time where you feel it and it comes into such use. So yeah.
Beautiful, thank you.
Hello, I'm Eve. Again, I'm from Elohe Center, and we're in the foothills of the Appalachians, so northern Georgia. And it's interesting to me, the whole trajectory of how this came about, and talk about resilience and preparedness. You know, a lot of our conversations during the week leading up to the hurricane was with facilitators and guests talking about, should we do this? Should we not do this? Should we come? You know, a lot of people fly in to Atlanta and have to drive here, and they're worried about airfare and, you know, not airfare, but the flights and if they're going to be canceled, and then just a lot of concern about the families. And, you know, if I'm in Atlanta and my house is trashed, I don't want to be on retreat with my, you know, even though it was supposed to pass, and it actually did pass by Friday morning and everyone was arriving Friday afternoon. But it was an interesting thing for me. On our end, we were very much thinking of, well, we have a generator, you know, we'll have power, we're connected to we actually are very fortunate in the fact that we're connected to a local tourist town on the grid. So when the power goes out, we actually don't lose power for as long as a lot of people around us do, because we're connected to this grid of the tourist town. But so I was thinking more of along the lines of our infrastructure, generator. We have, like you, Vanessa, we have a pretty robust facilities team. We have chainsaws, we're ready to go with that, and well water. As long as we have the pump working, it's going to be good. But what I was seeing more than people worrying about what would happen when they got here, they were worried about their own before they would even leave, and how it would be and impacting them. And so that's something that I didn't think about with, you know, preparedness, and how do we prepare and support people who are in fear and the unknowing and all of that.
Can I ask a question? You're saying people were concerned about leaving, as they were concerned about the infrastructure that they would be returning to after leaving a retreat center, is that right?
Yes, yes, and also getting here from their respective places around the country. So yeah, but the local, so that was the fear for people who had to fly in. They were worried about delays, flight delays, and all this stuff. The people that were coming from Atlanta were more worried about, I don't want to leave my family during this time, because what if they're like, what happened? Nobody knows what's going to happen. So they didn't want to leave their family. So that was a new perspective for me. And it's actually being, so on top of that, so we had both of our retreats that weekend. We had, you know, this is our full season, like this is our bread and butter season. And they canceled, and we gave everyone's money back, because this is a natural disaster kind of thing. And it kind of was reminiscent a little of COVID days of, well, should we or should, I was on the phone with the facilitators all the time. Like, well, should we or should we not? Because they're losing money too, you know? And but it just seemed like following the heart and supporting the fear and the unknown felt like the way to do it. And it's still trickling out now, even because there are so many people around us that have been affected so dramatically by the devastation here, that they can't come anymore, and there's cancellations and things like that. So it's just it's a new and also a little reminiscent of COVID days. I don't know if anyone else feels that way from when, you know, your centers and having to, like Vanessa, you said you've canceled the retreats for the next 2 weeks. I know this is probably your big season too. And also on my end, having to support our employees who were expecting to work and they're not working. And so having to support our employees because it's not their fault either. So it's a lot of different things of how to to go through. But for us, our idea is just go from the heart, and just kindness is the way. So we're just saying this will pass. We just got to support people and not hold on to the stuff that's stressful. And I also wish that we could help more in our surrounding areas. You know, we've done some social media posts on helping, like, people are following, giving, sending out information on who to donate to and things like that, but we're not up there able to put the foot on the ground like you guys are up there, Vanessa. So, but it is devastating. I mean, Asheville, that whole surrounding area, near and dear to our hearts, and I can't believe it.
Thank you. There's deep wisdom, I think, in your observation to go or to move from the heart, and that kindness is the way. At Commonweal, we oftentimes like to say that kindness is love with its work boots on, and feel like this is one of the beautiful things that retreat centers has to remind and to offer to communities around us in times of peril and trouble. Thank you so much for sharing. Any other reflections? Anything else to share?
Only because I have to step back. I just wanted to say to Vanessa and to everyone affected, hearing your stories is harrowing. And it sounds like you are, really just resiliency in action. Hollyhock is a really remote location as well. And so that does help with preparation for these kind of crises, because they lose power and lose the same things that would happen in a disaster. But I think two things that struck me in this conversation is that I think that we did learn a lot from COVID. So some of the things that we had to do, like for Hollyhock, for example, and I know some other centers, had to work more closely with being embedded with their community as a result of that crisis. And so I know with Hollyhock right now, their strategic plan, one of their 4 pillars is to continue that deep work with our close and our local island partners. And I think a big part of that, and that's financially, it's programmatically, and I think a big part of that is going to help us going forward. And the other point I want to make just is that very often fundraising for our centers is really hard. And we do seem to be able to lean into it after a disaster. I saw several personally centers whose community really rallied around financially after COVID hit. And it makes me wonder, as a development director right now, what we could do to start raising money before this happens. Like, what is our case to have this funding coming in across North America anyway, so that we're not just scrapping and asking people because of the outcome of these disasters. Anyway, thank you for letting me join you all. And I look forward to more.
Thank you so much, Leslie.
Thanks, good to see you.
Cheers. So we have about half an hour, which is not a lot of time, but I think it's enough to kind of start opening up some questions in a short, brief scenario here. And one of the purpose of this scenario, I think, is for all of us to start thinking, if a disaster of this scale strikes our communities, what should we start thinking about in advance of that? How could we start preparing? What would be nice for us to have in place as it strikes? And how can we respond afterwards? And I think this is just to start the conversation. And so the scenario I'm going to offer is very similar to this hurricane. It's a story that's going to be familiar to everybody, but I want you to think more broadly than just hurricanes. In these modern times, we are all vulnerable, I know, to wildfires, in California at least. I know that wildfires are in Spain and in Italy and in Greece, and I suspect they're also probably present in Croatia as well. You know, in California, we also have earthquakes. That's a huge threat to us. Tornadoes in the Midwest, et cetera, et cetera. Cold snaps that take down the power grid like we saw in Texas a few years ago. So there are broadly and unfortunately these scenarios that will likely touch us all at some point. So what I would like to just start us off on here is a scenario, and I'm going to lay this out just really quickly. You know, imagine a powerful storm, high winds, surf, devastation, like we're seeing. Imagine power going out for 1 million residents. Utility companies might take a few weeks to get the grid back on. Imagine water treatment plants have been damaged and tap water is not safe to drink. Imagine gas stations are inoperable and that there's long lines forming and there's a shortage of gas for people to flee. Imagine roads and bridges have been severely damaged, hampering rescue efforts and relief. Imagine thousands of people, if not more, to evacuate, find emergency shelters. And imagine local emergency response communities are overwhelmed. I think this is a common theme with a lot of these scenarios, that emergency personnel have a certain capacity. They quickly get overwhelmed when there are large case scenarios, and their attention goes to the most vulnerable and the most critical and the most acute needs. And so their advice broadly, I can say this having worked in some of the emergency response communities, is to store at least 4 to 7 days worth of water, 4 to 7 days worth of food. But having worked on the inside, quite honestly, they suggest at least a week, if not 2 weeks of those supplies. So thinking about this scenario inside of your community, you know, what are some of the infrastructure pieces? How do you think about power, water, communication, medicine, guests, staff preparedness, and these sorts of things? And now we don't have to, like, I think, sing an amazing story for how we would like to prepare and what would be the ideal pie in the sky here. But perhaps I think something that would be helpful for all of us is how do we begin to think about that? You know, I think something that would be helpful is to hear is what kind of resources, what kind of infrastructure do you currently have right now? How would you apply it to a scenario like that? Or is there a few areas that you know that would be really helpful to focus on? Could you share a couple of those areas as well? So this is just to start us thinking now. How would your retreat center respond to this crisis? How can you prepare? And I'd offer people to kind of go popcorn style. And if not, I'll call on people, and really just cursory thoughts on this scenario I think would be tremendously helpful for all of us, because I think that many of us are in similar states and need to think about similar things. So thoughts and reflections.
I think our biggest improvement that we've made in the past year is getting a generator to our refrigerated units. Because if we're going to have to feed, I mean, you talk about having 7 days of food. When you have 60 people here times 7 days, that's a lot of food. And I think of, you know, I'm just so grateful we have our refrigeration unit covered now. We've been open for 13 years and we finally have one this year. To me, that seems like a big deal, the refrigeration unit for generator.
Absolutely. And how to power it, refrigeration and how to power it. Dan, I think you had your hand up.
I'm quite, I'm some kind of feel, first I'm a bit jealous you speak English so well. That's not my primary language. I don't have a center. I run the NGO for 40 years, and we have several crises, war, 93, 91 to 95. I was in Omega Center as staff in 1993. So came back with idea to make open heart project with holistic help for the war people who suffer in the war, but you know it was no open. But lately we have earthquake 5.6 and 4.6.4, and we have floods a few days ago nearby in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So we are kind of bit of used to it, that kind of thing. I think in Europe it's more bit organized, that help of service. In European Union you got money for the communities common fund for that kind of situations. But the other things which come up to me, it seems that we're talking about green transition. Green transition means that you have solar panels, wind turbines, and if you are looking to have a less ecological impact to the environment, you have to be more sustainable. So it's something which save you electricity bill when you are working, and then when it's some kind of it raise a resilience, and when it's a problem come up, you are self-sustainable more, because you are looking that you make your own electricity, you make your own with water. Croatia are rich with the drink water and springs, so in a way it's kind of easier than in desert, for example. I think that if we are looking, I will look in that way, that when you are self-sustainable, you are growing your food, you are making your own electricity, you are trying to see how to not impact environment, that you build up your resilience even in that emergency situations.
Great.
And training also. We have fires, but you got used to it. You know what to do when it happens, because it happens quite a lot here. So
thank you. That's hugely helpful. And I just want to, I want to like expand on that point for just a second, because there is, in permaculture, there is a concept of stacking functions, right? How do you, or say when you're backpacking or you're on your own, how do you bring the utilities and the tools that serve multiple purposes? And I think what Dan is saying is that having solar, having wind, having renewable energy, right, is number one, critical for an emergency scenario, because it allows you to have power when the grid goes down. And it has the additional benefit of reducing your carbon footprint and also having a less ecological impact. And so I feel like this is an important point to make, because in this resilience conversation, the things that we can do today to make ourselves resilient for crisis and emergencies are also the things that will help contribute to the future that we want to move towards. And the more that we can find overlap between those items, I feel like that bolsters this sense of resilience as well. So I think that's a really critical point. Thank you, Dan. Any other reflections?
I would like to add something. When I got inspired when you say, when I came from Omega and to see and have a need to help people in a way I am doing that time, that I think it's important to, in the meditation and in the scenarios, to have a balance to help people and to not harm yourself, to not to have a measure. You can help, for example, if you, in your centers or in your home came 5 people who get lost their homes, and you shelter them for some times. you can shelter them for 1 week, for 10 weeks, for 2 weeks, but you can't help them for 2 months. And you can't shelter, I don't know, in so in that things to meditate on the balance to helping others, not harming yourself, and that's it.
Wonderful. Any other reflections, thoughts, or even just queries into how you would evaluate the status of your own retreat center's resilience?
One thing that's been a huge use, and I think somebody else in the Southern Appalachian region mentioned it as well, is having Starlink. We had never had that internet resource, but just for communication, that's been down for a while and it's slowly recovering. But having Starlink available at the sites that we're trying to that are our kind of redistribution hubs, investing in that hardware was very beneficial. I'm sure we're just going to keep that on hand, and maybe it'll need to be refreshed. It might phase out the technology as they do that to us, but having something like that as an option and available to us. And then the other thing, thinking about the generators is, solar is a great concept, and in our case, I was just thinking, do we have 7 days worth of propane for this generator, or 14 days? How much actual, material, fuel do we have for that? And it's a great question. That was one big thing I thought of.
Super. Well, I'm happy to say that I'm actually calling over Starlink at the moment. My Starlink panel is right there on top of my truck. I'm calling from a travel trailer on the road. And I want to also just, if I were to, forgive me for expanding on people's points, but I actually think that what people are saying here is really quite critical. And I'm in the process of pushing Commonweal to get Starlink, or beginning the process. Surprise, Oren. But one of the reasons why I think that that's a critical point is that in the field of resilience, there are these ideas of having redundancies. And internet is fine and great as long as it's working. But when it doesn't work, you have to think very deeply about what your communication strategies are going to be. If you're in cell service, wonderful. If a wildfire or widespread power outages shut down cell towers, that's not going to be so great. No internet, no cell coverage. Somebody, I think in the chat, mentioned radios. Ham radio is a very real thing. We have a ham radio at Commonweal, and quite frankly, we need to expand the number of people that know how to operate it. We need to maintain that, and we need to do more trainings. And I believe that Starlink is actually a very powerful backup. Because no matter if the power goes out, if there's wildfires, if there's earthquakes, if cell towers go down, there's a very good chance that the Starlink satellite systems will be up and running. Take a look at that. I think, $150, you can get roaming. It's 100 megabytes a second, oftentimes when the connections are good, and is an expense, but also is a redundant backup supply. Anybody else? Any other reflections?
No, what we
A
learned from
question. Oops. This
Go ahead.
is selfishly for my sister. She works for the city of Livermore, and they just went through a scenario thing around EMF kind of stuff, and that all communications would go down. I'm curious if you know, Stanley, if in an EMF attack situation, if Starlink would work for that as well.
Unlikely. So
okay, just curious because I wanted to give you that information.
well, so EMF is electromagnetic, I believe, frequency. And I believe the scenario is if like, say, for example, the sun has a huge solar flare and emits a bunch of radioactive particles, does it take out electronic equipment? Another scenario is, does somebody, and forgive me for going down this rabbit hole, does somebody detonate a nuclear weapon in the atmosphere? And does that will affect all of the electrical equipment in that area as well. So depending on the scenario, it's quite possible, but Starlink may or may not survive it depending on the nature and the source. Oren.
Okay, just curious.
Two things come to mind. One is what we learned with fire is that if the power goes down, that we don't have the same kind of water resources, especially if you're on a well. So we ended up putting up 30,000 gallon water tanks, which can serve both for fire and for drinking water if it's that kind of disaster. The other thing we know is that if there's fires or disasters, first responders first go to the population centers. So they'll go to the village, they go to the cities. They're not coming to the retreat centers. So they're not going to come to the houses that are isolated. So those of us that live in rural areas know that like you're kind of on your own for the beginning. And you have to take that into account. And then, you know, obviously as things in the urban area gets cared for, then they look at the further and the more remote you are, the less likely that you're going to get immediate. So kind of thinking about water, frost, fire is a big deal. The other thing that comes to mind is there's a book called Imaginable by Jane McDougall. And what she talks about in that book is how do we think about future scenarios? And one of the examples that she gave is that she worked with a group of people on a theoretical pandemic scenario. And this was before COVID. And what was interesting that when COVID hit, the readiness, both on a psychological level and on a functional level, was a lot higher for people who thought about that scenario ahead of time. So as we're discussing this, we're getting ourselves ready for the next, for what's going to come. So I'm kind of seeing RCC as a space where we can really dig into this stuff, and these conversations really are preparing us for that day. So when our first fires were 2016, and those were far away. They were like 10, 15 miles from here. But in 2019, was that? I can't even remember. They all merged. There was a fire that came 3 miles away from us, but we were so much more ready, not necessarily only in the physical sense, but we knew how to do, right? And this kind of intuitively feels right. So part of the question that I'm putting out is like, how do we sustain these conversations so that as retreat centers, we are in a stance that allows us to be more functional? Because like the next time a hurricane comes through, Southern Dharma will know what to do because we're already planning for it. And that's kind of how I feel we're in terms of fire. So thinking about what are the tools that we can create for ourselves that would be useful for us to think about. We may not all be able to implement a ham radio station, solar and battery, putting in giant water tanks, training our staff in how to use chainsaws, getting a portable fire truck just in case, having food supplies for 60 people for a week. That is a lot of food to have always on hand, right? And then, of course, you have it. And then like 6 months later, it expires, right? So it's kind of like, so like thinking about how do we create this resilience, maybe creating a document, maybe creating a training, maybe creating kind of like a 6-month resilience check-in to just keep us on edge, because there's also a lot of developments that are happening on a technological level that we can address into. Like Starlink is a perfect example. 4 years ago, we would have not imagined that you can have internet anywhere at any time, regardless of where you're situated. And now it is available. It does come with the blessing of its founder, but but things do change and we do learn. So I'm just kind of planting the seed that we keep these conversations, and the benefit of them is not only about learning, it's also building our own personal resilience to face what's coming ahead.
Dan had his hand up, Nancy. Afterwards.
Stanley, you inspired me that and I was thinking how to say in English, translating in my head. I think the word is fasting. No, fasting with food. And I find myself that when I displace my mobile phone, I get nervous and it's like some kind of addicted reaction. So maybe it's kind of my mind that maybe retreat centers can make some kind of program with fasting without internet, fasting without electricity, and it helps people to value more. I see that value of fasting is that when you, after the fasting, what you have, you value more, you see more clearly. So you get, we are adapted animal or human, and then when you have something, you got used to it, and you tend not to appreciate and not to realize that you can, I'm not sure that I'm saying what I think, that you got normal to have internet everywhere. And I remember one thing, we was making fire for the barbecue, and I was busy and I say to kids, make a fire. And they took mobile and look on the mobile how to make a fire, how to start a fire. No, if you don't have internet and you need to warm yourself, you need to know how to start a fire. So maybe that programs will help you, in the normal times, people to appreciate and to see from other perspectives, to get rid of the electricity, to get rid of the internet for a week, for 1 day, 3 days, like when you don't speak and you got what the word is, not mom, silent. You have insights. So it seems with all that things we got used to it and they are gone when the emergency came. Then that training can help to prepare, or let's say, psychologically.
Exactly. And I think that dovetails in with this idea of refuge that retreat centers have to offer. And I feel like it has a lot to dovetail with the deeper work that retreat centers are called to do in the world. And there's a lot of great systems thinking right now on this idea of rationing. How do we actually take the resources that we have and apply it in really responsible ways? Because we may not always have cell phones, and perhaps it's not great for our mental health. But I know our time is tight. Nancy, do you have a comment?
Just really quickly, and just echoing Dan, some people at Tattabagush Center, when we got Starlink, said we kind of missed the days when we couldn't be involved, be on the board meeting or be at when we were on retreat. You were actually had to be on retreat because it wasn't reliable. So I think there's something to be said for that. I just wanted to kind of echo what Oren was saying about mindset, and maybe there is some sort of, I always resist templates, but list of reflective questions pre, now, and post that we could invite boards and others to keep, because it's also, we're coming out of COVID, we are in a poly crisis, there's a scarcity mindset too. And I know, at Tattamagush Center, we had phases, like the generator that keeps the fridge on. And then the next set would be generators that actually can hit all the buildings. Like, we're not there. There's a longer term plan. But when you're kind of, you don't have the budget, where you're kind of at a very survival mode, doing that longer term pre-investment, even if it's saving money like solar, it's hard to make that case. It's hard to I don't want to say it's hard to justify it. I know we're all convinced, but it's really hard to manage, I think, for some of the smaller centers. So that helping navigate that real reality of navigating at that level.
Excellent. Absolutely. What's not said here, and it's actually been said a few times, and I think is worth emphasizing, is that financial resilience is a big part of this. And especially a lot of these measures that we're thinking about and talking about take funding to do. And we also have staff, we have infrastructure, we have all these things that are probably already underfunded. How do we create extra space to develop resilience when there are immediate needs today? And I think that would be a fascinating place for us to have a conversation. And there's a couple of things. One, there are some federal in the United States, I'm sorry, Dan, there are some federal investments from the Inflation Reduction Act. Specifically, there are some tax credits that are designed for nonprofits that want to develop climate resilient infrastructure. And what I can do is Aaron and I can send along some links, but these types of rebates are designed for people that want to put solar, renewable energy, battery systems, anything that reduces your carbon footprint. The idea is that they evaluate kind of where you are, they evaluate who it's being serviced, and a few other things, and you can get between 30 and 60 or 70% of the cost of those projects as a rebate. So they're not grants, but there's something that you talk with your financial directors and you can apply for in your when you file your taxes. And if you meet the requirements, they're guaranteed to be returned. So it's not a grant, it's an actual tax rebate for a lot of this infrastructure. As for Canada, I'm not entirely sure. Eva?
Yeah, so we actually, we're a nonprofit and we've been wanting to do solar for a long time, but you get tax credits. And since we're a nonprofit, you don't pay income tax. But they just this year, like you just said, have now changed that. So we put solar in, and I didn't know it covered batteries too, which is a huge deal. But we put solar in and now we're getting this, it's a refund. They're actually, like you said, it's just not a grant, it's just you get this money back.
Yep, exactly. So
Right,
we'll send
so I because we wrote it off for a long time because we didn't think we could get any of the benefits from that. So I'm happy to see that that's happening now.
Wonderful. I'm so glad. Apply for those credits. We'll circulate information on this. I feel like there's a lot of energy here. There's a lot of places that we can take this conversation. And I just wanted to open this up to this group here. There are explorations about the infrastructure. There's explorations about the finance. There's explorations about leadership, about community, about refuge, there's a lot of things that have come up here. And I'm just kind of curious, to take a quick poll from all of you. Is there something out of that list or even outside of that list that piques your interest? Is there something that you would like to follow up with? Is there any area of interest that we should dive into and explore more deeply? Sorry, that was a long list. So forgive me. But think about that. Would love to hear. We want to continue these conversations because I feel like we're all in the same boat here. And I want to offer a few more things. Leadership, community, finance. Absolutely. One is that there are a lot of guides, there are a lot of checklists, there's a lot of kind of sheets to evaluate your resilience and to work from. And one of the things that I can do is I could probably sort through some of the more pertinent ones for retreat centers and some of the ones that we're looking at, and I can circulate those along if that would be helpful for this group and for others at RCC. Two, as you go through, wonderful, and you start thinking and trying to aggregate this conversation, one small thing that I would suggest when you think about your infrastructure is to think about systems. What is the food system? What is the shelter system? What is the drinking water system? What is the personnel and community systems? And this kind of helps to synthesize and make things a little bit easier to get your head around because it can be really overwhelming. So you can just take a look. I know that I live in a very power vulnerable space. A storm knocks out the grid really quite frequently. What systems do we need in place in order to keep the power on? It could be solar, it could be generators, it could be that we need to have an electrician, it could be that we need our main panels upgraded. It's just take off small chunks of this and think in systems. Christian said, regular touch points for conversations, accountable to-dos, absolutely. And I think I'll talk with Oren, I'll talk with Aaron, and I think what we should do is actually get a follow-up conversation on the books here in the near future. So that's absolutely something that I think we're interested in. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And I think fundraising is another big piece here. So I think we have a lot of work to do. I think this has been a tremendously helpful conversation. I know that I took notes on what was said, and there is an enormous list of resilient qualities and things that people are already doing and people are thinking about doing already. And so I think that sharing those, I think hearing them, I think learning about what others are doing, I personally have found inspiring. I feel like I've actually also learned, and I hope that many of you here. And I think that following up these conversations is key. Oren, do you want to expand on this and say a little bit more?
Well, I would say that the question for me, and I pose this question for people that are on the stewardship circle for RCC and the listening circle for RCC, is what can we do that is best of service? So taking some of these ideas, Stan, that you have, and I don't know, in some ways it's like put some of these resources on a website, create a shared document around solar, but then also have a working group of like, at this point, I think anywhere you're in the country, there's going to be some kind of climate-induced natural challenge. And how we create working groups? Like take the West Coast retreat centers and talk about fires and earthquake. Take the Southeast and talk about hurricanes. Take the Midwest and talk about fires and tornadoes, and just get a pragmatic edge. And I think I would also challenge ourselves to think about who are potential philanthropic entities that might help RCC as a whole and all of us. It's kind of on our own to do some of these things. It's like we already had jobs in which we had no time to do everything we needed to do. And adding this layer becomes overwhelming. But I feel a sense of relief when I hear those of us that are doing similar things. So that kind of joint learning process, I think, would also be useful. And it resonates with the personal resilience that we have been doing at retreat centers for years through whatever practice, nature connection, spiritual growth, contemplative practice. Those are all the kind of personal resilience that you need to do in order to deal with these questions. So I'm really putting this out to those of us that are involved with RCC or who want to get more involved on how we can really make this a key part of what we're doing.
We're at the top of the hour. Thank you, Oren. I think that's wise. And before we jump off, let's just take a quick moment of silence to ground ourselves, to hold those that are suffering in our hearts for a moment. Yes, thank you all. Beautiful conversation, and I'm grateful to have this circle. Be well.
Thank you.
Yeah, for those who want to join us for our next community call, that will be October 29th, where Nancy will be leading us on fine-tuning your guest experience with equity and racial healing in mind. So please join us for that if you can.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.